Welcome to episode 104 of the Live with the Maverick podcast. The theme for today's discussion is Actuaries in Leadership Part 9. And we are very excited to have with us our guest, or returning guest, I should say, Dave Dillon. Dave is Senior Vice President and Principal at Lewis and Ellis. He is the President-Elect of the Society of Actuaries. Welcome back, Dave.
Dominic, thank you very much. I'm honored to be a repeat guest. So enjoyed the first conversation and looking forward to this one as well.
Looking forward to it as well, and we only have a few, so you're in that exclusive club, and it's my pleasure. I think.
Yeah, I won't ask you who you put first as the repeat, but I'll take it as an honor that I am a repeat. So
Excellent, excellent. So just love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, Dave.
yeah, so as you said, I've been at Lewis and Ellis for 25 years. I am a health actuary. I started at a Blue Cross, and one reason I like working at Lewis and Ellis is I do a lot of different things. I'm not a specialist, I'm a generalist. And I think that's kind of what ultimately led me to a lot of the volunteer roles I did, because I met a lot of different people in a lot of different roles, a lot of different companies. And so I started volunteering at the SOA in about 2008. And ever since then, I've been a very active volunteer, primarily on the health section side, but a lot of professional development and content stuff. And then I also do some work for the Academy of Actuaries as well, do some instructing and things for some of their programs. But so yeah, for about the last 15 years, been really active volunteer, and it's great to meet a lot of people. I think if I didn't do the volunteering, I'd probably know about the 20 actuaries I work with, not the 20,000 people I've met over the years in volunteering and people like you. So it's just been a great experience.
That's excellent. And before we get into the conversation, I mentioned earlier, like I alluded to, congratulations are in order. You're recently elected as a president-elect of the Society of Actuaries, so congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
No, that's a lot of hard work. Natural question I have is, what inspired you to run for president?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There was a lot of a lot of discussion about it, right? It's a big decision to do that or not. But I do kind of view the president position as kind of the chief volunteer. And as I just kind of alluded to, I love the volunteering role. I love the interaction. And so a lot of it was wanting to continue what I felt like I was helping with when I was on the SOA board a few years ago, things like that. But I think a lot of it too was from when I was on the board. I was just a health actuary. I didn't know much about the life side. I didn't know much about the pension side. I didn't know about the operations at SOA, how, about the exam process that much other than taking exams, right? And I learned a lot that made me think, you know what? I want to help keep building this field. I learned that there were a lot of the number of exam takers was dropping off. I'm someone that wanted to become an actuary since I was 13 years old. So I've been super passionate my whole life. And it really kind of, I was a little distraught thinking that our profession was taking a little slight dip a little bit, not as many people going into it. So I really felt like based on all of my years of volunteer experience, I could help, interact with the other volunteers and really kind of help build uh, you know, build the actuarial profession and get it to where, everyone was as passionate to become an actuary like I was.
Excellent. On that note, you talked about the dip in exam takers. In our preliminary conversation, and I'm just paraphrasing, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said it was 50%, and I know you said it was down for a number of years, and it seems like within the past few years it's kind of rounded the corner and it's going back up. So I guess first of all, correct me if I was wrong on the number, but just directionally speaking, it went down. So my question is, did the SOA do any analysis on what the driving factors were for that particular decrease?
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge SOA is facing and other actuarial organizations as well, not just the SOA, it's the rise of the data science degree. A lot of universities are offering data science, very similar skill set, right? And a lot of potential exam takers are like, oh, there's a degree I can take, and I don't have to take 8 to 10 years of exams, which is somewhat enticing. So I do think the rise of data science has been the biggest challenge for that. And I think, the SOA's response to that is to, they've added the predictive analytics exam, different certifications and things like that to help kind of bring in some of those people that might lean that way as well, but just show that actuaries, I think one of the things we said on the SOA board when I was there is, we're the original data scientists. We like to think we're the original ones, but we've always kind of done one kind of case study around it. And we want to show that we can do, other stuff than just the traditional stuff.
Yeah, I always when this comes up in so many of our conversations on the podcast, and I certainly see it as more of, potential for areas of overlap. I definitely think that there's areas where data scientists are more unique, and they're in terms of like tuning models and developing some of the more technical aspects of models themselves. But certainly areas of overlap as well. And I don't see it as, I know that there are certain people in the profession who see it as being adversarial, data science being adversarial to actuarial, but I really see it as more of like a Venn diagram and perhaps a spectrum. So just
Yeah, I
interested to
agree with
see.
that maybe from the standpoint of kind of once you're up in your career, but I do kind of view it as a little, like as someone coming into college, it's kind of either or, right? And so in terms of what they study and so it can be a little bit of a challenge there, but I completely agree with you. It is a very, interactive and should be in collaborative from both sides.
Yeah. Now, so the exam takers, I think, have turned the corner, so that those numbers are not going down anymore. I think they're starting to go back
They're
up
starting to level out. Yeah,
or
they're
level
starting
out.
to come back around. Yes.
Yeah. What was the catalyst, I guess, for that, if any, if they've identified anything?
Yeah, I think it's still a work in progress. It's still a, evolving thing, but I think there's a couple things that are helping is a couple years ago, the SOA created the affiliate program. And what the affiliate membership program is trying to reach more of the high school, college kids and like the instructors and teachers. It's like kind of like a big group of interested parties, right? And helping promote and get information out there about the actuarial field. And I may be slightly off on the number now, but I think we've gotten about 10,000 affiliate members. It's really grown in the last 2 years. And I think that has helped a lot. I think another thing that has helped with the exam takers is, the SOA is an international organization, and the international side of things has exponential growth versus, let's say, the traditional U.S. and Canadian exam taking base. So I think kind of those two things have helped a lot. And then I would say moving forward, we're just at the very beginning of it, but we're hopeful that the new kind of FSA pathways redesign will help as well, just because we're adding some flexibility to the exam process. So I think it's kind of been a step-by-step thing of reaching people a little bit earlier, and then once they kind of get in, help it be a little more flexible.
That's good to hear. And I just got back from the CAS annual meeting, and that's something that a topic that came up as well. Um, I imagine that they're probably at different phases of development there, but it's a common theme across the societies. I think also the IFOA, I think, has always been, at the head of the curve on that as well, because they have a certain way of dealing with that. I won't get into some of
Yeah.
the details, but um, when you think of your term going forward, you're serving out your term as president-elect, and eventually you'll be the president for a year. What are you hoping to ultimately, when you get to be president, what are you hoping to contribute during your term?
Yeah, so it's hard. As I've been thinking through this, as an actuary, we think about ROI, measuring against metrics and things like that. And I think it'll be hard. I think so much of the stuff the SOA is doing now, and hopefully that I'll contribute with, is so long term. I don't know if I'm going to know for a while if what we were doing was successful or not, but I do think I think keeping track of the number of exam takers will be one of the first things we'll look at. Again, just making sure that we continually have people in the pipeline. I think longer term, I think one of the things SOA wants to do, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is we do want to be seen as not just in our base case, right? That we're great at the insurance stuff, we are working on a lot of things to try to, put actuaries in places, positions of uh, where they can work in other areas, right? And I think once we get to that point, and again, that could be a very long term, but I think that will help show that there has been success with the SOA is doing with the strategic plan and things like that, just informing people. I think another thing that is, we're starting with, of course, is like AI stuff. We're starting to, put a lot more information out there for actuaries, and we're not going to know how successful we are with that for some time.
Thanks. Excellent. Now, I touched briefly on what you want to accomplish when you become president, but in today's world, this year, you're the you just began your term as president-elect. So let's dig a bit deeper on the SOA president-elect position within the scope of president-elect. What are your key responsibilities?
Yeah, so the president-elect position is a board position. There's 18 board members of the SOA. There's 15 elected board members, and there are three presidential officers, president-elect, president, and past president. And so as president-elect, you come in and as one of the 18 board members, and you serve on the executive committee, which is a subset of the board. It's six board members. And so that's kind of, the thing to help get your feet wet a little bit from an operational standpoint. I've been off the board a couple years. It's an opportunity for me to get in on the executive committee and, kind of hear of updates on maybe the issues that I talked about a few years ago, but there's some new issues. So it's kind of a training ground, so to speak. And so I'm part of the executive committee. And then one of the other kind of main roles that a president-elect has is kind of the board liaison to the SOA's sections, or we're moving towards the phrase committee, or and so the community. Sorry. So it's kind of, and as I said earlier, I was a health section volunteer, so I'm very excited to be a liaison to the sections and all the volunteers there, because that was kind of my role. That's what got me so excited about being an actuary. So I kind of help make sure that all the communities have what they need. They help, I mean, they drive the professional development for their like kind of subgroup members and generating stuff that's good for them. And so it's a great role to really make sure that kind of those volunteers get what they need and are producing, the content they need for all their actuaries.
That's helpful. And one more thing that you mentioned when we spoke previously, you talked about being an ambassador in the president-elect role. And you mentioned at the beginning of the call, going to the Chinese Actuarial Association meeting, and then also the Caribbean Actuarial Association meeting, I think at the end of the year. What does that ambassadorship entail? So when you're attending these meetings on behalf of the SOA, other than, the typical networking, shaking hands, are you doing presentations, panels? What does that entail?
Yeah, so I'm probably, on the learning end of that. I'm as we're recording, I'm leaving, as you kind of said, I'm leaving within 24 hours to go on to China to attend one of the conferences there. But I do know it's kind of a mix of things, right? I think for this specific trip I'm going to now, it is a little more of the China Association having an anniversary meeting. They wanted, honored guests, other actuarial organizations, and I think that role is going to be a little bit different than some of the other trips I ultimately go on. But like, for example, we're planning, I do have a few remarks, as a representative of the Society of Actuaries. I will be presenting to that conference for a few minutes. But we will also take that opportunity. The SOA is obviously very heavily involved in China. I think the number is about 40% of our exam takers are from there. And so that is a big investment for the SOA. We will be meeting with professors of the universities over there. We'll be meeting with the large employers of actuaries while we're over there. So it's kind of these international trips tend to be a mix of different things. It's a lot of building relationships with the other actuarial organizations, giving those organizations and the exam takers in their country what they need for education and research, which is obviously the SOA's bread and butter.
Is there anything you're looking forward to? That's like quite a big trip from Texas to
Yeah, I got to
China.
be honest with you. It's probably a mix of anxiety and excitement. As I've been joking, I'm just a little old rube from Oklahoma who hasn't, traveled internationally a whole lot. But I am excited. I am looking forward to these experiences. Yeah, I've never been to Asia, never been to China. Again, hell, I can hardly say the English language sometimes, let alone trying to communicate in other languages. But I think that is kind of the fun part, right? Is getting to know actuaries from
Mhm.
other places. I feel like I've done a pretty good job interacting and communicating with actuaries here in the U.S. and Canada. So now I'm looking forward to the opportunity to kind of expand that.
As someone who's done that more so virtually than in person, but doing that through this podcast and interviewing people in 17 countries, definitely can say that that's a very enjoyable thing. And I imagine just having so many people in the same place would be great too. So, looking forward to hearing more about that trip. Now, we talked earlier a bit about, or you mentioned the sections and the committees. You talked about when you mentioned the board liaison position. So let's dig a bit deeper now on the SOA sections and committees. I know you said that sections I think are going to communities, so keep me honest on the language
Yeah.
here. But I think this is a great opportunity to talk about professional development. So at a high level, how are the sections and the committees organized?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think what happened, so sections have always been the core, kind of the core, like next layer down in terms of volunteering, and it is very topical, right? And some of them evolved differently, and they were obviously topical. So I was a member of the health section because I'm a health actuary. The health section evolved differently than some of the others. We on the health side had been kind of stayed as, let's say, a bigger group. There was one kind of, I'll say, area of interest, long-term care, kind of originally came out of the health section, and then they were so focused on long-term care they kind of wanted to break off and kind of focus on their own professional development, focus on their members, things like that. And the life side evolved differently, where there were a lot of little people, little groups, little sections where people really got ultra focused. And I'm not going to be able to list off all the life sections because I'm not a life actuary, but they broke down, and while they did a lot of good work, we did determine that some of them kind of almost got too small, too specialized. And there wasn't as much interaction with broader groups. There wasn't a whole lot of interaction between members. And so basically, we're just kind of building them back up a little bit into, I think there's going to be 8 communities now. So I mentioned the long-term care section. They will be part of the health section now. Again, they will help, provide leadership for that community. And so it'll be just kind of, again, I think what's interesting, we're going to kind of build them back up, but then also have a lot of like subgroups. So the communities can interact with a little more people that do similar stuff. I think what's happened was, again, the resources kind of got strung out. And now we're kind of just refocusing and moving forward with the 8 communities. And the SOA started with a pilot program, say about 3 years ago, and it really worked. I forget which 2 sections did it, but it's really worked. And because it worked, that's why we're moving forward with communities for all of those sections.
So, for instance, let's take I know you said that there are several, and we don't have time to go through all of them in detail. But let's say, for instance, the health section. If I'm an actuary who wants to get involved in the SOA health section, what are some examples of current initiatives that they may be focused on? What that I may want to know.
Yeah, I'd say, again, the main kind of goal of the communities are, I'd say, professional development for everyone else that is interested in that topic. So the Health Section Council has been heavily involved in getting out, webinars. I'm involved with the Health Section podcast, right? So I'm one of the co-hosts for the Health Sections podcast series, where we, have a wide range of topical authors and speakers on different things, and it's producing the newsletters and things. So it's really focused on professional development. So there are a lot of opportunities for volunteers, writing articles, helping with the podcast, helping with the webcast, things like that. And then related to that, of course, is the communities are also heavily involved with the research. So the SOA has kind of, the broader SOA Research Institute, which does phenomenal work. Dale Hall's group puts out fantastic stuff. But the sections may also highlight, because it's topical, say let's spend some money on certain topics that our members want to know more about. And so the communities will help with that as well.
Excellent. Well, something that I found interesting in preparing for the interview, I actually went on the website and, took a look at what the sections were, and something that stood out to me. A few things stood out to me. The first thing was that you don't have to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have to be an actuary to actually join, which I think is really nice. And in the spirit of what I'm trying to do is help open up the profession to other groups, who not only who we are currently interacting with, but those who we could potentially partner with in the future. So I think that's a very neat idea to open up the sections to people who are not only actuaries. But a few other things is the volume of content that I saw. And I'm actually reading this off just literally verbatim. It's like more than 40 webcasts, more than 300 meeting sessions, more than 50 podcasts, numerous seminars and boot camps. That sounds like a lot of content.
It is a lot of content. And I'll be honest, like, so I mentioned the podcast. I love producing that content. It looks like I might be taking a slight step back from doing those now, just with my new role, but I love doing that. And I do think those councils have done a great job of producing content for their members. And as you said, we have historically called them kind of like friends of the council. So people can, listen in and, like the webcast and podcast and things, some of it's introductory stuff to help get people interested in maybe a new area, but other stuff is, for the moderate and more expert to help them reinforce and make sure they know what's going on in a certain area.
One more of a big picture question I have on that, because I mean, I can't resist the question as a content creator, is that how do they feel about, or the SOA feel about engagement, broadly speaking? When I say engagement, meaning people watching the podcast and watching the webinars and reading the research papers. And the reason I ask is because I genuinely believe that there's, not just for the SOA, but just broadly speaking for the profession, room for improvement in terms of engagement and getting content to people, and leveraging social. So just curious to know how they feel about engagement at a very high level.
Yeah, I mean, the SOA has a marketing and communications team that is phenomenal in helping promote everything that is done at the bigger kind of SOA umbrella level and at the sections. And I think what amazes me is, I really only today have gotten some metrics on like the podcast that I help with. While I don't remember the exact number, it was way bigger than I would have thought for a little old health section, podcast that I felt was maybe a little niche, right? For just a little small subset. But it is obviously reaching other people, because it just was amazing to me. So I do think that the SOA understands that what we can do is not just for traditional members, that we can, use our expertise and research, in our research and education to reach others.
Excellent. Now, another question on engagement is, we talked a bit about international. How do you feel, or how does SOA feel about the level of engagement from the international community? Is that consistent with what you're seeing in North America, or would you say there's a ton of room for improvement
Yeah,
there?
I think historically the international members haven't been as active, haven't been as engaged with others, and that's definitely a focus of the SOA to help kind of improve that. I think, obviously just geographically, it's, so far away, it's a little harder, in terms of, because obviously the SOA puts on a lot of great in-person meetings too to help engage and educate, and that can be a challenge. So the SOA has specific international committees and more targeted committees for certain regions. And it's amazing what they've been doing in growing that. But that is definitely at an earlier stage than maybe more the traditional locations.
Okay, well, that seems like an exciting challenge. I know for sure. I've seen the CAS paying more attention to international as well. So I think that's a good thing for the profession broadly.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. No, another thing I noticed being a content creator is is that you've made a concerted effort to post more on LinkedIn. And personally, I think you're doing a great job, shining a light on the
Thank you.
profession.
Coming from you, that means a lot. So thank you very much.
Yeah, because I honestly I know what it takes. I know the commitment. We talked about this in the pre-meet, the discipline, just just the work it takes to produce content in any form. And so what topics do you typically post about, like as you're doing your personal content?
So it's kind of a mix of things. So from a work standpoint, I do a lot around healthcare reform, Affordable Care Act, that kind of stuff. So I like to, I think a lot of my audience on LinkedIn knows that's kind of one of my area of expertise. So I like to educate people and ask questions about that, right? Because that's kind of what I've been working on the last 15 years. But then kind of on the other side, I like to talk a lot about stuff I don't know. I may not be as self-aware as I think I am, but I always like to say I know what I don't know. And so I like to bring up conversations about stuff I don't know as much because I want to hear from other people. So AI is kind of one of those things. That's right. That's obviously something a lot of people are talking about. And some people are maybe a little further along on the learning curve than I am. And so I want to engage those people and get the conversation started so I can learn. So when I communicate on LinkedIn, it is a mix of me kind of putting forth my knowledge base for certain areas, but it's also to help get me my knowledge base a little higher floor on those topics.
So sounds like a lot of it is education, like you said, starting conversation,
Absolutely.
about building
Yeah.
a knowledge base. And something it reminded me of something. I always encourage people to comment and to throw questions out. Certainly, I would just broadly say, I don't mean to hijack the conversation, but just because I'm a bit familiar with this topic, real
Yes.
quickly, is always good to share your thoughts, even if you're not necessarily deep on something, just to share some thoughts on a topic before, and then if you're soliciting the information or soliciting comments from people. But I remember one of the episodes I did, or maybe one or two actually, probably two episodes I've done on my series have come from LinkedIn comments where I talked about a particular area. I remember I talked about sports analytics, I talked about pandemic response, and then it turns out that there are people who are doing that who I wasn't familiar with, or I was less familiar with at the time. And then we took the conversation from the comments into the DMs, and then they turned into episodes. So it's amazing not just the education, but some of the connections that you can make. And
Yeah, I don't think I've done a podcast yet based on a LinkedIn comment. You've set a goal out there now. I'm going to pay a little more attention to see which ones I can flip into that podcast conversation.
exactly, you'd be surprised. I mean, the more, of course, the more engaging it is, the post is, the more likely it is. So there's definitely, I think it's a good challenge, definitely to keep the content engaging. So that, yeah, that's just something that I noticed. Now, anything else, like in terms of, you talked about education and networking, is there anything else that you're seeking to accomplish from the post that you're doing?
Well, I always viewed it. So I've been active for, gosh, I don't know how long, a long time, right? Uh, I think I did it a lot again to help build those networks and again inform earlier. So, I also come from kind of an educator background. My mother was an English teacher for 40 years. My dad was an insurance agent who ultimately, at the end of his career, taught and trained other agents. I've always kind of had that educational flair as well. I teach a class at Georgia State University now in their actuarial program. I love that side. So I think that's kind of what also helped generate that. So, it is amazing. So it is a platform that, 10 years ago, we didn't know we would have to help reach out to other people. And as I think I said at the beginning of our conversation, if I didn't do these things, I'd probably know the 20 people I work with and not the 20,000 that I've met via LinkedIn.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a great opportunity. Um, no, shifting gears to something
Sure.
that I find interesting. We had in the U.S., of course, recently had a national election, and of course, my just a disclaimer. I'm sure for you, for SOA, for me, certainly my community, I welcome viewpoints from all angles and from all parts of the political spectrum. So certainly not a political question in nature, just really more a straight up
Yeah.
business question. Now, so we had an election and we're going to have a change in administrations in a couple of months. So how might actuaries be impacted by a change in administration?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'll back up with a little bit of context. So a lot of my kind of day-to-day work is with like state insurance departments on healthcare reform and things like that. And as people ask me about my career and things maybe that surprised me, and I've always said that I never knew as I was growing as an actuary that I'd have to learn at least a little bit of politics and dealing with politics. Uh, so I do a lot of work for, I'm going to stereotype a little bit, northeastern blue states and southern red states. I work with both. And, as actuaries, we're supposed to have objective analysis. And so I always joke that, if I've torqued off both sides, that means I'm probably doing something right. And so I feel like I have done a pretty good job of that. But it is interesting is when elections change, it does create differences in those northeast states and those red states, and sometimes they move out, they move in. So I think that and we've had let's say how many years, 16 years or whatever, the administration's flipping and flopping and changing, right? And so, and again, I'm a health actuary, so health stuff does tend to be a little more political, right, than life insurance or property and casualty insurance. And so it does give the opportunity of things changing. So what could change? And again, I think this is for someone that follows the health side, this is a pretty obvious one that I'm keeping an eye out and would other people should is uh, the Affordable Care Act had premium subsidies for people to help lower income people. And when the pandemic hit, those subsidies were extended and through 2025. So we have one more year of extended subsidies. And they're on hold right now. There's no extension of the extension. So I think it'll be very interesting to see about what would happen with these premium subsidies. Now that we have a new administration, are they going to try to use a different approach? Are they going to, double down on the approach there from the previous administration? Maybe not. They may try to do something else. So I think that's kind of like the most obvious and direct one. I think some other indirect ones that people may not think about as much, though, is there are several health insurance products that are, I don't know if they're dependent on major medical or the ACA, but they're very tangential. So short-term, what we call short-term health insurance and hospital indemnity insurance. So what has happened over the years with changes in administrations, generally speaking, the Democratic administrations implement some rules on hospital indemnity and short-term products to maybe mitigate their impact a little bit because they want to bolster the ACA because that's been the Democratic approach. So when the Republicans come in, generally they go the other way, right? They reinforce some of the ideas of the hospital indemnity and short term because it's a little different option, it's more flexible and so forth. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with not just the ACA, which is obviously what gets the big press in the U.S. Around those things, but it will likely impact other products as well.
No, of course, you mentioned that there's obviously different perspectives on how to deal with things and what the administrations will prioritize. But are there any common? I mean, healthcare is quite complicated, and of course, more so in the United States than other places. But are there any areas of agreement between the parties on like what are the major drivers of healthcare costs are that could be reduced? That are not necessarily political in nature, but just more neutral and just more obvious.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone understands the main challenge of, yeah, I guess what way I would say it is they all understand the main challenge, which is kind of the healthcare cost trend, which is a combination of utilization, people doing different services that may be more costly, and then the inflationary piece. But I think where it comes down to is how to address that problem, right? So, in the US, picking a round number, healthcare cost trend is about 6% a year, roughly. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. But typical inflation is 3%, right? Without, not accounting for a few blips. So, healthcare costs grow at, let's call it double, but how the two sides decide to attack that problem has been different. So, one side might lean towards flexibility, give people options. Other sides might be, well, we need to kind of help purchase products, things like that, get more people into programs, things like that to help mitigate anti-selection. So there's I think there is a commonality on what the issue is, but how to solve it obviously is different.
So we talked a bit about some of the legislative changes. How does that then flow through to, well, I guess like a two-part maybe. It's like, one is like, how does that legislative piece flow down to like what actuaries have to do, presumably maybe pricing, if I had to guess,
Yeah, yeah.
as not being a health insurance expert. And the second piece is from a product perspective, are there any changes that would kind of flow through to like the private market? I think you might have hinted at that, but just
Yeah.
to clarify.
Yeah. So to the actuaries things, I'll give you an example from a few years ago that are interesting. So when President Trump came in the first time, he was very vocal, about the Affordable Care Act and things. And I don't want to go too far into the weeds in this. This is a very kind of inside baseball
Sure.
issue for health actuaries, but there was a provision in the Affordable Care Act that he defunded. All right. And he thought it would have a certain action. But what happened was the states did kind of something else to counteract that. All right. And it's what we call silver loading in the health and care. So what happened, though, to your question, is the actuaries had to get involved in figuring out what to do on this thing was defunded. Now we're doing it a different way. And that silver loading impacted the premiums for everybody. And so everything had to be repriced. Every state, they all had to be repriced. Now, there's some discussions currently ongoing on how the states are doing that. There is some diversity in thought and how to utilize that, but every state has their actuaries doing that. So one decision by President Trump at the time to defund that one provision directly impacted the work of ACA pricing actuaries in developing all the plans for the consumers. And what was the other part you were talking more? Oh,
But
the more privatized
the
side. So
yeah,
yeah,
private side, yes.
yeah. So I think what's interesting is, and a lot of people don't know this, but the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, however you want to call it, is really only about 10% of the US market. It gets all the oxygen though, right? It gets all of the media attention. So while there could be a lot of changes to the ACA, a lot of the other markets aren't impacted. So that is something to consider. So I think like when people think, oh, all this is going on with the ACA, yes, it's very important. It hits a very important target market, but 90% of the US is actually under different programs. So while it may have some impact, it doesn't impact some of those other markets as much. Now, some of it bleeds over into the large group or small group markets or Medicaid. Medicaid expansion was obviously a big discussion of the ACA. So there are some overlaps. But I think, hyper specifically, I do think of what I would call like supplemental health products that might be a little dependent on the ACA. Like I mentioned, the hospital indemnity and short term, those I think will be impacted more than anything else.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, something I think is very obvious. I respect you, but something I appreciate about you as a professional is your forward-looking mindset. And I know that there's a lot of experienced actuaries, but they may not necessarily be as forward-looking in terms of how they think of things. Now, how would you, and I think we might have talked about this briefly in our last episode. I know we talked, but I think it was more specific through the lens of healthcare. I think you talked a bit about AI and some of those things, but how would you describe your vision, like more broadly speaking, not necessarily limited to health, and again, not necessarily limited to your role in the SOE, just you as Dave as an actuary. How would you describe your vision for the actuarial profession, like as you look forward and in terms of what you think may
Yeah,
or may not happen?
it may be a little, I think this is very idealistic, but I think sometimes ideals are very helpful, right? I do think what I want to see is actuaries historically I'm sitting on my computer crunching numbers by myself, And I want that maybe again, this is maybe idealistic and a little bit of a kumbaya thing, but I want us all working together. And as I was saying earlier, I have figured out what I don't know, and I need to interact with others to help me with what I don't know. And I want other people to do the same thing. So I would love to just have a big interaction of actuaries helping each other out. That's what, I envision the SOA communities, helping individual actuaries that may not have much exposure to other actuaries to get that opportunity. And as you and I have discussed over the last few minutes, is the international piece of that. I think a lot of us, not only do we just stay in our cubicle, we obviously stay in our country generally. And I think it is helpful to learn different things from different cultures and different people because they do things differently. And just because I've been doing it for 52 years doesn't mean it's the right way, right? So I just think that collaborative, interactive approach among actuaries is what I would love to see.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. But specifically now, if we take a step back on the industry, so what I heard, a couple of things, industries and then geographies as well. So when it comes to industries, what are some of the industries you think that we could work with more or learn from or both?
Yeah, so insurance is a financial services field, right? That's all it is. And as we were kind of alluding to earlier, I think people in other financial services, call it banking, call it, more traditional Wall Street, I think they've just kind of seen actuaries in that our one aspect of financial services. We're expert modelers. I think we can go into any of those financial services fields. I actually was talking to a client of mine the other day, and while I had never done a project like this, I'm looking forward to possibly assisting. It was on like HOA homeowners agreements because there's risk on how they do those agreements and things like that. So, I think there's very similar fields like that. And maybe I can't think of all of them, but I've never been asked to do anything with an HOA before. And I know other actuaries probably have opportunities and other things. So I think just generally speaking, if we can start getting into that other financial services area and just, help educate and provide research in those areas, we can do this too. And I think we'll just be better for it as actuaries.
Great. Yeah. And as you know, that's the Maverick mantra is looking at across industries, looking
Yeah.
broadly at risk.
Yeah.
Now, just back kind of going back to the geography piece too. You're going to China, of course. Asia, I think is of course a very appears to be a very important region. I know for a fact for CAS is certainly looking there, but
Yes.
like any other regions in particular that you think would be strategic for the profession at this point, or you say it's just kind of equal?
Yeah, I'd say that the Middle East has really grown uh, a lot in terms of developing their kind of their actuarial practice and their needs. I've developed a relationship. I don't know if you have talked to 𝗟𝗃𝗲𝗄𝗃 yet. If not, I think you need to
I think
talk
so.
to her. I would highly recommend a podcast with her. She is the first female FSA in Saudi Arabia.
Mhm.
And she's kind of that test case of that, indicative of that growing market. Saudi Arabia, I think it's called Vision 2030,
Mhm.
that where they are requiring more like Saudi Arabia actuaries to be involved, more, in-country actuaries. So I know the Middle East, actually, some of my colleagues at the SOA, while I'm traveling to China, they are traveling to Riyadh because of that expansion and excitement for the actuarial field.
So Dave, you may or may not know that I actually did an episode recently on Saudi Arabia. It was like, well, it was not just Saudi Arabia, but other countries in the Middle East
Okay.
as well, called Actuaries in the Middle East. That's episode 95 with 𝗂𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. He's an FIA. It was an excellent
Okay. Well,
episode.
I have to go check that out.
Yeah, so recommend you and anyone else listening to check out that episode. That was a really good one. Something I have to ask is I meant to ask this earlier. I asked because I guess I'm navigating something similar. Well, obviously, as someone who does content and also has a day job and has to manage things, and
Mm.
I just got a new puppy, and I'm just sure I just can't imagine. Like I don't know how people honestly have two, three kids, and I think you have a few. I know
I
I honestly
do.
don't know how you do it, but but in terms of balancing um like both your regular job at Lewis and Ellis and then now taking on the
Yeah,
president-elect and
it's
then
a
president.
challenge. Yeah, it's funny you say that. A few years ago, and this, yeah, it was even before what's going on now. I was in an elevator at a meeting, and this guy got on and did not know who this actuary was. And I apologize, I don't remember his name, but what he said to me is, "Oh, you're Dave Dillon." Because my first question to you is, how the heck do you do everything that you do? And my answer to him was, I really don't know. Maybe the next quip would be, I don't sleep a whole lot, so when I don't sleep, I'll create some content. But I will say it is a challenge, and it is maybe compartmentalizing things, really scheduling things out. As I said earlier, I teach a class at Georgia State. I do the volunteering for the SOA. I do volunteering for the Academy. But I think with my new role, you do have to learn to say no, and that may be one of my worst qualities. So I am trying to actively trying to figure that out. Like when I get requests for webinars, podcast. Now, this one, obviously, I would never turn you down because I love the
Good to know.
experience. Yeah. But it is a challenge. I think it's just managing priorities. I think what has helped me the most is really making, scheduling things out and sticking to that schedule.
And that's something that I think is the biggest thing I've learned in the past, definitely in the past year. I think when I got started, out of necessity, certainly I said yes to everything because I was trying to grow and
Yep.
develop my brand. And
Yep.
once I got to a point where it was more or less, I mean, it's always growing and developing, but when you get to a point of, if you want to say critical mass or use a term, it becomes just untenable to say yes to everything. And yeah, there's one thing in particular I want to start saying yes to again. And I think maybe the less new episodes I do, I'll be able to, is like me getting interviewed. Like I've had to say no to a few of those just for capacity reasons, because there's so many things
Yeah.
I'm balancing. But I think, it
Yeah,
may
well, good
seem,
luck with that. Yeah, it's a challenge. The analogy I've used before is, you build a swimming pool, you want to keep adding water and water and water and water to be able to swim in it, right? And enjoy it. But if you put in too much water, you're going to drown, right? So you got to be careful, how much water you add to that pool.
yes, yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, I think the principle, even for people who are not doing multiple things, even just within your job, yeah, always think of what needs the most attention, and it's important to note. I think that can evolve as well. Like your focus can evolve. There are times where you may have to put more time into career and. I mean, your family, of course. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speak to anybody's values, but
Yeah.
presumably, if you have a family, they're important too.
Yeah, I actually, as I decided to throw my hat in for this position, I have three daughters, one still at home, and I basically sat her down and said, "Hey, I've always taken pride in being a dad that's here for stuff. Even though I was a consultant, I didn't travel as much, I didn't miss a whole lot. I'm like, I might start missing a couple things," and she was like, "I get it." And so yeah, it can be hard to balance that family stuff on top of all this other stuff.
Yeah. Well, Dave, this has been a great conversation, as I knew it would be, and just want to thank you for your time and for your contributions, and looking forward to sharing this with the community, and wishing you the best on not just your trip to China, but the flight itself. And the flight, I know, is
Yeah.
going to be
Well,
very
thank
long.
you. Well, Dominic, again, and I'm going to take this opportunity to say thanks again for all you do. You do a phenomenal job promoting the actuarial profession. You and I are on kind of different sides of the actuarial profession.
Yep.
But I think it's great because you do cross-pollinate and you bring everyone together. So thank you for all you do there.
It's my pleasure, and deeply humble, and you're welcome. And let's definitely keep in touch. Looking forward to hearing about the chirp.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good one, Dave. Take
Hey,
care.
thank you.
Bye bye.